Good evening, everyone. Sometimes Christia Freeland explains something so perfectly that only she can do it. And little potato. This is fantastic. This made me laugh hysterically. We're going to watch the whole minute and 47 seconds. Here we go.
Been given a fond nickname in China. He is called Tudo, which I believe means potato, and I can't say the Chinese word, it's Xian Tudo, little potato, because his father, Pierre
Really? This is serious.
Elliott Tudo, was senior potato.
When leaders in China dismissed this prime minister as, quote, little potato, he thought they meant it as a compliment.
I want to remind everyone for Carlton, we can't do indirectly what we can't do directly. So I'd like him to avoid terms that might be considered insulting under the rules.
You rose, Mr. Speaker, in your role to say that what you can't do indirectly, or directly you can't do indirectly. Namely, I am assuming you mean insulting the Prime Minister by calling him little potatoes. So I would like some clarity. We were not actually calling him little potato. We were, however, repeating what...
You've heard the phrase enough, you know?
The Chinese leadership has called our prime minister a name that is so insulting. You, Mr. Speaker, have ruled it is unspeakable in this House. I will put partisanship aside and say I will not stand for that kind of treatment for our Prime Minister, for my Prime Minister. So in retaliation, will the government do the right thing and cancel the $250 million gift to the China-controlled Asian Infrastructure Bank?
The honorable parliamentary... I think everyone enjoyed that. Order.
I certainly enjoyed that. I thought it was good. We're going to get to the Asian Infrastructure Bank in just a minute. We will get there. I think that it's interesting, all of that. Spending $250 million to build roads in Asia to fight coal. Yeah, that's the excuse Mr. Morneau gives in his speech, but we'll get there. So here is the first kind of major story. Mr. Scheer gives a fiery speech that is, it's not all that full of meaty stuff to kind of bite into. I made a whole bunch of notes. I was going to go through the speech, but the time index that I used is in the description. If you're interested, I think there's he flip-flops between English and French throughout the whole thing, and I think I'd prefer him to do the whole speech in English and then the whole speech again in French, rather than having it said kind of weaved throughout, because I think he said what he said in French and English, just kind of piecemealed through the speech. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong about that. I'm not as good in French as I am in English, so I understood some of the French, but I don't, not all of it. So anyway, it was an interesting speech. The most interesting part was at 28 minutes or so, 25 to 28 minutes. He talks about China. He talks about increased trade and specifically calls out United Kingdom and India, talking about his foreign aid chops that he's been developing the last couple of years since he got leadership. Depoliticizing the military procurement process. So that's directly talking to Mark Norman. That's around the 27-minute mark or so, 28-minute mark. He talks about in the Ukraine. He said end investment in the Asian Infrastructure Bank, and that's going to come up again, and we are going to talk about that. He talks about North protectionism. So, there is a lot of stuff in this speech. There really is a lot of meaty stuff in this speech, but I don't know that this is a big election-style speech. This is setting the table. This is people like me looking at this going, okay, all of the stuff, all of the bases are covered. This is the kind of stuff that you need to have. What are you going to do with the big foreign policy stuff? What are you going to do with this? So he's setting the stage. He's setting the chessboard up. He's saying, this is the game we're going to play, because Trudeau's not. He's running around like a chicken with his head cut off. China's saber rattling, and Trudeau doesn't know what to do. And Trudeau doesn't know what to do. That's the problem. He's absolutely stymied, and the house is on fire. The barn is on fire. There's horses out, but also horses in the barn. So he's kind of standing there frozen, and everybody's looking at him going, "What do we do, boss?" And he's going, and he just pours himself a drink or whatever. Anyway, that's my take on everything. So this is Scheer setting the table. Wow, that was a long walk to get there, wasn't it? CBC reporting, quote, in the first major foreign policy speech, Scheer takes aim at a disastrous Trudeau. And Conservative leader Andrew Scheer delivered a hard-hitting speech Tuesday that sought to outline his foreign policy priorities while laying Canada's perceived failures on the file squarely at the Prime Minister's feet. I scroll down. Quote, we've seen serious mistakes like this over and over again from this government, and they're almost always attributed to Mr. Trudeau's poor judgment. I scroll down again. Scheer cited Prime Minister's Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiation tactics, his much maligned trip to India, quote, the most disastrous foreign trip by any Canadian Prime Minister ever, Scheer said, and mounting tensions with China as evidence that that the federal Liberal government has conducted foreign affairs with a focus on, quote, style over substance. Scheer said Canada should take on a more active role in some of the world's diplomatic hotspots by standing closer to Israel. He reiterated his support for U.S. President Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as that country's capital and advocating for greater freedom for the Iranian people. He also said Canada should treat China more as an economic partner than a strategic ally. Quote, total reset on China. In the 21st century, some politicians want Canada to be the referee, Scheer said. I want Canada to be on the starting line. To that end, Scheer branded China, not Russia, as the world's, quote, strongest propagator of authoritarian values, while citing the Asian countries posturing in the Arctic as a threat to Canada's national security. He also mentioned Russia when he was talking about that, by the way, too. Okay, back to the article. Quote, I will deal with China with eyes open. I will look for ways to strengthen our relationship and open new markets, but with the understanding that at this critical juncture, we need to show strength and resolve above all else. And yeah, he talks at length about China at the time index I was talking about, 28 minutes there, if you want to hear a whole lot about that. So it's an interesting speech, and the longer version is linked in the description as well, right beside or underneath this. It'll say Scheer's speech or something to that effect as the headline. And here is the beginning of the Canada considers investing in a new Asian infrastructure bank. I'm not sure if there's, hold on, I'm going to go back here for just a second. I'm not sure if there's interest at all in me really breaking down this speech. Like I said, it's weaved through French and English, and he at 10 minutes 42 seconds he talks about climate change, and he wants to work with international allies. He said that he brought it up in this context, saying that he would give more information later, but he wanted to say that he feels it's an international issue and something that he should be brought up in this context, and talks about the rise of China and Russia, the dangers of Hamas, Israel, talks about Palestine. So, I mean, like I said, this is a meaty speech, but a very niche speech. So if there's interest in me really going through this speech, let me know in the comments. But if you're satisfied with what I've said so far with it, I'm satisfied with talking about it. I think that that's pretty much it. It's a really wonky speech that people like me kind of go, yep. That's the one you needed to give right now. That's it. So, okay. Anyway, CBC News reporting, Canada considers investing in new Asian infrastructure bank in China. And this is just letting you know that this is happening. And, well, we're going to let Mr. Poilievre tell us what's happening in about a minute here. It's 2 minute 28 second clip, but I'm just going to show you the first exchange. Here we go.
Prime Minister shattered his promise that the budget would balance itself this year. Remember that? He's added 3 times as much debt as he said he would. The cost of government was up 25% in just over 3 years. Among the wasteful spending is the $250 million for the Asian Infrastructure Bank to build pipelines and roads in China. Will the Prime Minister show even a modicum of respect for Canadian taxpayers and cancel that $250 million waste of money?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
We were pleased to make an investment into the Asian Infrastructure Bank. We know that that makes an important difference. There is, in fact, one project that bank has taken on in China. It's a project to reduce the use of coal so that we can reduce pollution. The other projects, of course, are in less developed countries. And we think it's important to fund infrastructure around the world, which helps Canadian companies and helps our world be a more prosperous place.
Didn't he just say this company invests in one project, and that project is to reduce coal, and he said, and the other projects are in poorer countries? What? Mr. Morneau. Oh my goodness. Here is unearthed, and I was just looking to see how many coal-fired power plants were on track to be built in China by 2030, just as an arbitrary date. This was published on March 28th, 2019, so this is last month or month and a half ago or so. And it says, under the proposal, the country could add a large coal power plant every 2 weeks for the next 12 years. Huh, interesting. Here, the target is for the country's coal-fired capacity to continue to grow until peaking in 2030. The cap would enable China to build 2 large coal power plant stations a month for the next 12 years and grow the country's capacity by an amount nearly twice the size of Europe's total coal capacity. So we're giving China $250 million to build coal-fired plants? For what purpose? I'm not sure entirely. I don't understand the liberal logic, but I guess I haven't understood the liberal logic at all since they've been governing, because they haven't made any kind of sense, because throwing money at problems is what the liberals do, and the money isn't spent efficiently, and so the problem just ends up costing more instead of actually being solved. Trans Mountain Pipeline is one example, and, well, the Asian Infrastructure Bank is another one. And how about we add illegal border crossers to that list as well? Do you guys remember this? This was a post from August 24th, 2018. This was the height of the illegal border crossing crisis. And this is the National Post reporting, quote, Canada's backlogged asylum system is, quote, not sustainable, immigration minister says in leaked letter. And it says the number of people seeking asylum in Canada is rising far beyond what the existing system can handle, according to a recent letter from Immigration Minister Ahmed Hassan obtained by the National Post. Quote, without changes to improve efficiency and productivity of the asylum process, wait times and backlogs will only continue to grow, Hassan writes in the August 14th letter addressed to the Canadian Bar Association. This situation is not sustainable, nor is it fair to the people who need Canada's protection. Interesting. It's also not fair to the taxpayers who are footing the bill for these people who, a lot of them, don't qualify for any kind of status in Canada. But we'll get there. That's not just me saying that. I'll show you who said that, and we'll get there right now. Here we go. Here's the up-to-date version. This was the 2018 version. This is today, or this is May 7th. That's today. And it says, CTV News reporting, refugee system facing largest backlog of asylum claims ever. AG finds. Canada's refugee system is plagued with a backlog of asylum claims that is worse now than it has ever been, caused in part by systemic inefficiencies, according to findings from Acting Auditor General Sylvan Richard. As part of 5 audits of government activities released Tuesday, Richard's office looked at how quickly and efficiently the 3 government agencies involved in reviewing and processing refugee claims are doing their work. The audit found Canada's refugee system is not able to respond quickly to surges in asylum claims, which has led to a 2-year backlog as new claims have rushed in over the past 2 years. Quote, we found that Canada's refugee system is unable to process claims within the 2-month target set by the government. In fact, backlogs and wait times are worse now than when the system was last reformed in 2012 to address these very same issues, the audit report says. An influx of asylum seekers to Canada that began in early 2017, including more than 42,000, quote, irregular migrants who've entered Canada away from the official border checkpoints, has outstripped the government's ability to process them. With the current backlog of more than 75,000 claims, asylum seekers might wait up to 5 years to learn whether they can remain in Canada. I'm going to pause here and just show you that of this number, and I don't know about the 75,000, but of the 28,000, 90% did not qualify for any status in Canada. So that's a very, very high number at a very high sample to say perhaps this is being abused and not actually going to actual refugees when most people don't qualify for any status in Canada because they already have an open refugee claim in another country, another safe country. So they don't get to open another one. That's like, well, I don't know a good comparison, but the only comparison that jumped into my head is getting married and then getting married again, right? Without getting the first one dealt with legally, right? Or whatever. So anyway, the CBC News says, quote, fewer than 1% of more than 28,000 irregular asylum seekers, quote, legal border crossers have been removed from Canada so far. And The article says, while just over 28,000 asylum seekers have crossed the border into Canada irregularly, illegally, since the beginning of last year, fewer than 1% of those have been removed from the country. Those figures come as senior government ministers maintain they expect that close to 90% of those who cross the border at unofficial ports of entry will see their application to stay fail. Now, why does that matter? Why does that matter? Because it matters because it costs money. It costs us a lot of money. And I've done a lot of these. I've been doing this a long time. I covered the illegal border crossing crisis, and one of the articles that I used got scrubbed, but a few of them didn't. And I found the Wayback Machine copy of the original article that I used. So I'll show you the cost of this. But each irregular migrant costs the Canadian government between $10,000 and $34,000. And one of the important factors of this is how long it takes for them to get their hearing, because once they get their hearing, they can be processed and moved out or moved on, right? If they qualify, they qualify. And if they don't, they don't. And if they don't, they get moved on. I don't know. I honestly don't know what happens. I should probably find out, but I don't know what happens if they don't qualify. Removed from the country, deported, whatever it is, I would imagine, but I don't know. And if they do qualify, I don't know what kind of help and support they get from the process, and I don't know how that money's calculated. But $10,000 and $34,000 is the cost of housing them and making sure that they're around for their hearing, which could be 2 to 5 years away. And here is the PBO report. This is the scrubbed article. I tried to find it, and the Westman Journal was gone, I guess. But this was an aggregated report, and it came out November 30th based on the PBO report that came out like a day before. So anyway, I found it interesting that this was scrubbed, but it doesn't matter. Immigrant issue could cost $1.1 billion, PBO report. A report requested by Brandon Souris MP Larry Maguire has determined that the federal government's $173 million set aside for refugee processing will not be able to cover the cost should the number of claimants continue to remain the same. And it didn't cover the cost, and they didn't remain the same. They went up. But I'll scroll down to here. It says, quote, over the last 2 years, the governing Liberals have failed to properly manage the border. Close to 35,000 people, now 70,000 people or 75,000 people, have illegally crossed the border into Quebec, Ontario, British Columbia, and my home province of Manitoba, Maguire said in an introductory statement at the press conference. Quote, we've been repeatedly stonewalled by the Liberals on what the total costs have been to taxpayers. Today, we finally have those numbers, and they're very staggering due to the allowing of illegal border crossers. By the end of next year, the Liberal government, because they failed to manage our border crossings, will have spent at least $1.1 billion. Maguire noted that the PBO report, which is titled Costing Irregular Migration Across Canada's Southern Border, did not include costs incurred by provincial governments in areas such as housing, welfare, and elsewhere. Right, so that's about $200 million in 2018, according to the Ontario reports that I read, and about $200 million for Quebec as well. So in addition to the $1.1 billion they're talking about here, it's another $400 million, or $1 billion just in 1 year for the total costs. Anyway, that's aside, because it's all taxpayer money, right? We're paying for all of this, regardless of federal or provincial. That's taxpayer money. Who pays the taxes? That's you and me, right? Okay, back to the article. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars that are not included in the report, if not another billion, he said. The federal government, the RCMP, the CBSA, the Canadian Border Service Agency, CSIS, the Canadian Services and Intelligence Agency, Immigration and the Refugee Board have all had to reallocate resources to deal with the illegal border crossers and plead with the Minister of Finance for new funding. And we all see how Bill Morneau deals with that. The PBO report said the total cost of asylum claims reached $340 million through last year's $368 million this year, and could broach $396 million in 2019-2020. Remember, they budgeted $173 million over 2 years. Ridiculous, right? Oh, well, they'll say that right now in the article. So here we go. Giroux noted that the federal government had relegated $173 million over the next 2 years to cover additional costs associated with asylum seekers, both legal and illegal. Giroux could not delineate between the two kinds of refugee claimants because information collected by the federal government accounted for the average cost of all claimants. Haha. So quite interesting, this inept government continuing to blow taxpayers' money in China for reducing coal pollution, while at the same time realizing that China is, well, shutting down farmers, not taking products, holding and threatening to kill Canadian prisoners, all because we've got Meng Wanzhou, and sorry, I know I've said that incorrectly, but I've said it that incorrectly so long, it's hard to change the name, we've arrested her at Donald Trump's behest, and China's not happy. And that's the core of the problem here, that Justin Trudeau's diplomacy has failed completely. And I don't know if they're just trying to pay them off or what, but it seems like spending Canadian taxpayer dollars to build roads in China to reduce climate change or coal pollution is a fool's errand at best. And if that's actually the goal, how many metric tons of CO2 are we getting out of the air for our $250 million of investment? And how long until we see the returns on that? And are we going to see returns on that? Or is that just a $250 million taxpayer gift to China? Because that seems like a really bad idea. Or is it just me? All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Check out the People's Party of Canada. I think probably Mr. Bernier would make a better prime minister than Mr. Scheer, but at the very least, a better opposition than Justin Trudeau, right? At least Mr. Bernier would show up to work and not get lost in a paper bag on the way. Okay, have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thanks for watching.